Welcome to the Thank You Life podcast. Today's guest is Wilhelmina De Castro. Wilhelmina is one of the amazing providers in our CAP provider network and the founder of Integrate in Southern California, which is a CAP practice that also offers other services as well. Wilhelmina is trained in CAP through PRATI and MDMA-Assisted therapy through MAPS, and then Psilocybin-Assisted therapy through Naropa. So all the medicines that are available now. In addition to teaching master's level courses in psychology, human behavior, and social innovation, Wilhelmina serves as the executive director for PRATI, which is the Psychedelic Research and Training Institute, and has served as a lead educator for IPI, the Integrative Psychiatry Institute, and Naropa University. Wilhelmina is also a lead therapist on a clinical trial for psilocybin and treatment-resistant depression, and is a retreat facilitator in the US and in Mexico. And in this conversation, Wilhelmina and Kevin, both as therapists in the space, can just share a lot of their own perspectives and insights about doing this type of work and what it means to balance their own well-being in order to really show up for their clients. And they also get into an exciting project that we are launching this year, a collaboration between Integrate, Wilhelmina's practice, Thank You Life, and New Earth, which is a LA-based nonprofit that we've done some collaboration with. They help at-risk youth and young adults in Southern California. And so we are launching a really amazing initiative combining our efforts to create this community-centered model for psychedelic therapy. And they get into that quite a bit in this conversation. So just a really beautiful talk between two leaders in the space. We appreciate Wilhelmina so much for taking the time to do this podcast and all the work that we've been able to do together in this space. So we hope you enjoy this episode with Wilhelmina De Castro.
Thank You Life is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was started by myself and Dr. Dan Engel in 2022 as a financial assistance fund for psychedelic therapy. Psychedelic therapy is expensive, and 95% of the US population cannot afford its costs. That's where we come in. We partner with over 100 ketamine clinics throughout the US to help clients who cannot afford this treatment. In 2024 alone, we gave over $250,000 away to help 115 people receive this life-changing treatment. This work is not cheap, and it is life-changing. If you feel inspired to give or to become a monthly donor to help more individuals access this treatment, please visit thankyoulife.org/donate or email our Director of Philanthropy, Meredith Thomas, at meredith@thankyoulife.org. Every bit counts, and small monthly donations are especially important to keep this work moving forward. If you can give even $10 to $25 a month, you will join our community of contributors who are changing the lives of so many. Thank you all for your support. This episode of the Thank You Life podcast is proudly supported by Enthea, a mental health company dedicated to providing access to safe and affordable psychedelic-assisted therapy. Like us at Thank You Life, Enthea is committed to removing health equity obstacles that impede access to impactful mental health care. Enthea is a third-party administrator specializing in innovative mental health benefits for employers, including access to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. As the first and only provider of advanced mental health solutions for the workplace, they enable companies to expand their benefits to include breakthrough therapies that address root causes of mental health challenges. Visit enthea.com to learn more. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Thank You Life podcast. And Wilhelmina, thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so where to start? We've been hanging out today here in Austin, Texas, and I've had a lot of rich conversations, but I would really love to open it up in terms of, letting people know what we've done together. Mm-hmm. So people know a little bit about you just from the intro of the episode, but we've been partnering for a long time.
Yeah.
Your practice Integrate out in LA, I guess also in San Diego when we started. And y'all were one of our initial ketamine clinics that we started working with.
Yeah. Feels so long ago now.
Yeah. 2022, 2023, whole bunch more last year. And so, last year would love to share with folks that we together got this Healing Hearts, Changing Minds grant that allowed you to do 3 queer facilitator groups for CAP specifically. And yeah, would love to just hear you. So eight people in each one, and yeah, would love to just hear you share a bit about all of that.
Yeah, so I think like the inception of the relationship too, like with Thank You Life and Integrate, is like just in the entire like ecosystem of psychedelics. Coming from community social work, it's always been one of the major questions that like circulates is this medicine is so profound. Medicine work is so profound. How do we get this? How do we ensure that this gets to the people, right? Of like having experienced medicine in like some privileged spaces, has always felt like a duty and a responsibility to be innovative and to partner with organizations and like Thank You Life to say, how could we do this together? And so, you know, we started with some group work, and then last year we had the Healing Hearts Changing Minds grant. And the focus on that grant was, as we were running different groups in Integrate, and as people were coming, clients were coming, we realized like there wasn't a lot of queer facilitators with a lived experience in which other queer folks could come in and not have to like educate their facilitator or not have to like mask so much, that they can really not just drop into like their experience as a queer person that just happens to be there. They can drop into the entirety of who they are. Because oftentimes when people hold an intersection of like marginalized identities, that's how they're seen in the space of like, oh, you're the queer person or you're the queer person of color. But we're so multifaceted that all those other parts get ignored oftentimes. So with this grant, we were able to run 3 cohorts of training queer facilitators with an entirely all queer faculty too.
And so if I get it right, it's something like if the whole faculty and the whole cohort is queer, it's not like, oh, I'm the queer person here. I just get to be who I am.
Yeah.
Because there's something here that we're all sharing, and so we can easily move beyond. And like that might be a rich or important piece of my identity that we'll touch on, but yeah, I don't need to be defined by that in this space because it's something that we're all just sharing here.
Yeah, I mean, there's an assumption and then there's nuance, right? Because it's like it's not just like a monolith of being queer and everyone has like a shared lived experience,
Right.
but it's like there is an understanding because we also live in this society and in this like environment and system where we're also facing similar oppressions, which impact us in different ways too. So even knowing that shared struggle, even knowing that there is a capacity to have compassion and empathy with one another, like the deep dive that we could get into very quickly was, I would say the connection was a lot faster because we didn't have all this like armoring up that we have to have in more like heterogeneous spaces.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So allowing the practitioners who were participating to, I imagine, feel a sense of safety from the container that was formed.
Yeah, you know, a lot of the experience, because we did the whole, you know, we were together for these, like, each cohort was together for about 10 weeks and they had an experiential, and the experiential took place at Temecula Retreat House where, in that was like, there was continued teaching, there's experience with medicine, and there was joy, and there was like hanging out, and there was play, and a lot of the common things that came up of like, this is the queer summer camp we never got. In which we get to do these joyful things with one another and without being so fearful of like the structure of a camp or the structure of an institution. And it was not perfect, right? It was like there was things we learned along the way around our own, our own learnings, our own growth as a company, as Integrate. But because of the container that was built collectively, there was room for that. There was room for mistakes. There was room for growth. And those are some of the, like, I think, additional learnings in addition to, like, learning about medicine and facilitation.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how exactly was it set up? Was it retreat style or more kind of spaced out? And then like where did the more like downtime get to come in?
Well, they had 10 weeks of lead up that were all didactic online.
Got it. Okay.
And then we had some additional teachings in person, but really in the in-person was for them to practice in dyads of facilitating for one another, learning what it's like to be in that energy of facilitation. And that was the main part. That was like more retreat style.
Yeah.
And then also like eating together, sharing stories together.
I was going to say, but so that's when that happened, was during that retreat piece that, you got the downtime, you got the sharing meals.
Yeah. So special. Yeah.
Where it got to, really be like a camp.
Yeah, it was totally like camp. But we had like a dance party. We also, we communed with nature. We learned about each other. And I would say it was just as transformative for the instructors as it was for the participants, because in all of these different roles, we all have to mask and protect ourselves, but when we get to share our full story and be heard, and share and extend teachings and also be open to learning from the participants, there was like a really generative flow that was unlike anything I've ever experienced in learning spaces.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And that really relates to this conversation that we were having earlier about this idea of, it relates because specifically what this was for were for facilitators or people interested in facilitating. So we were talking a lot earlier about really just facilitators, therapists, specifically ketamine therapists or other psychedelic therapists doing their own work and what that looks like, and how to balance that. And you keep using the phrase parallel process, which what I imagine you mean is something like, as a psychedelic therapist, I'm doing my own work, I'm in my own process, which may or may not include different medicines at different times, and then I'm also with clients and medicine and supporting clients with ketamine or other things if, we're in other places where other things are legal.
Yeah. I think there's the more I've taken the deep dive into psychedelic work, the more I've had time to interrogate my own training as a clinician, and in some of the ways I was trained, there was an inherent power dynamic of who holds the wisdom and who needs the help, right?
Even going back to grad school for yourself, you were talking about.
We're getting our masters to be masters in something, right? And then it's just seems like a kind of a cosmic joke now when you kind of do this whole work. But when then you kind of reorient it to these are all, I think Ram Dass says, they're all temples for the rational mind, right? Schools and things like that. But if we really move beyond that around this commonly heard, the inner healing intelligence, there's a dissipation of the power dynamic too. And when you dissipate the power dynamic more, then the invitation for the clinician to have vulnerability, the invitation for the clinician or the practitioner to be human alongside and to also be transformed in relationship for the person you're facilitating for, that whole process is very real, and it can be felt. And so, in this program, a big part of the work was understanding, when we work with medicine, the veil between the practitioner and the person journeying is so thin. So, and because our sensitivities and our receptivity is so strong in medicine work, you can't fake the funk when you're not being authentic, when you have a bunch of crap going on and you're busy and you're not like intentionally there, that will be sensed, that will be felt, and you'll receive feedback around it, right? Of like whether it's a journey that kind of pivoted in a weird way, like the more misattunements, things like that. But when there's trust, and when the journeyer knows that you too have traversed similar landscapes, their ability to deepen with themselves and know that you are a steady person that has one foot in this world and also has had one foot in the world they are traveling in, creates this like divine opportunity to go further in the work.
100%. I want to deepen into that, but also something you said that I think is really fascinating is about, how it can lead on the facilitator side or the therapist side, more vulnerability, more humanness, and then also my own transformation. And especially with the first two, and then I think I got it with the third, with my own transformation piece too, is I think it'd be really interesting for us to like show the field the therapeutic impact on the client of all three of those things. And I think the impact on like, okay, so me as a therapist getting to be vulnerable and what was the second one? More human. I think those are very clear ways that like those can impact the client and have therapeutic value for the client. That doesn't necessarily mean that like I'm sharing with them things that I need them to hold and unpack for me in terms of the vulnerability. But like, and then even like being transformed, I imagine, if I have some moment with a client and I can reflect to them how meaningful that was to me, or how that actually impacted me in my life, maybe not in the moment, but the next week I come back and am able to share something like that, I imagine that can be incredibly impactful therapeutically for the client. If we're trying to build out things like self-esteem or meaning or connection, I think it's a rich opportunity for a client to be like, oh wow, like I put you up on a pedestal, then I found out that you were human, then I found out I can even touch you. And like, what does that say about me if like I'm able to actually touch you?
And so much of this like complex and even like chronic trauma is enacted like relationally, right? And relationally in a way where someone holds power over someone, right? And then sometimes in the inherent like therapeutic dynamic, that's how it is. There's a power dynamic. But when we are able to, I think, really astutely say like, what you said really stirred something in me, or like, I'm going to take a moment, just even these like micro moments to know that like you're joining them in the relational field. And when you join them in the relational field, that there is something unique happening just between you two, right? And I think there's room for repair there. There's room for people to see like how their experience can impact others in really beautiful ways too. And that takes like skill, and that takes like, attunement and everything like that. And I think you made an important point of like, we're not putting our clients to work for us, because like, that can happen in an attempt for intimacy, in an attempt for closeness. But when we truly are verbalizing the way we are bearing witness, that's profound. Really, really profound.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah, so see if we can go back to this other part too about, I said I wanted to deepen into. I'm kind of blanking on what it was. It was something in the realm of like the facilitator doing their own work. Also this bit that you mentioned of being able to take someone as far as we've gone, or for them to know that we've had a foot in the world that they're traversing on medicine in an altered state, all are so important. And I think what you were really kind of harping on was like the safety piece for the client. But I also think there's a huge piece for the therapist to feel just so much more grounded and competent that they have their own experience.
Yeah.
And yeah, those also bring that safety to the client.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's so much there. And I mean, I think the main point that I think we both agree with is it is just super important for psychedelic therapists to be doing their own healing work with the medicines that they're working with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like worth a, like, maybe for us to talk about, because we hear this all the time, right? Of like, you got to do your own work. And I love unpacking that when people are like, make sure you do your own work. And I'm like, hey, what the heck does that mean, right? Of like, does that mean like going through a buffet of different medicines and just being like in these non-ordinary states all the time? And like, the more I'm in this work, the definition of that starts to shift, of relationality to the medicine and the molecules. Like, what are my common patterns of practice or like resistance, and which medicine is the right ally to shine light on that, because oftentimes what we are inviting people to do is do really deep truth work with themselves, to tell the truth around what's happening in their own internal universe, and if we aren't doing that for ourselves, how could we truly offer empathy and compassion around the difficulty of being honest with oneself, the difficulty of, and the grief of releasing patterns, we can say it, we can be like, and this is a cycle and this is that, but when we know it deep in our bones around the pain of letting go of a pattern that has been so ingrained in us, like, even without words, it can be felt that a person that we understand them, at a really deep level without even telling them our experience.
Totally. Which comes down to me, it's like, if I'm trying to help someone transform, but I haven't been transformed myself, then yeah, like, how the fuck am I going to know?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like when I I was really, really young when I started social work. I just hadn't been through like a lot of life yet,
Totally.
And like the imposter syndrome was a real thing, right? Of like, the people I really had the privilege to work with had gone through so much adversity in life, and I had my own versions of that. And I'm now like retrospectively understanding, like, it was because I couldn't understand them at this like deepest like soul level too, around the relationship to struggle and to pain, especially when I was really, really young in my career. And then life happens, right? And you get some grit and you like go through a bunch of things that injure you, that make you never the same again. And like, that's when I started to find myself move more out of the rational training space of how to do therapy into the empathic heart space, and really feeling deep compassion and deep empathy. It's because I had to be in the ring in my own way,
Totally. So when did you get your master's?
was young. I was like...
Was it like right after undergrad for you?
Right. And I was a young undergrad too. So I finished undergrad, I think at like barely 21.
Yeah.
Finished my master's at 23.
Yeah.
Then I started walking and crawling after that. Just kidding. But it was like, then I learned how to drive. Like retrospectively, I'm like, you didn't go through shit yet, like.
I mean, yeah, no, for real. So, did you graduate high school early, or how did that all
I don't know what
start?
happened. I think I went into school early. Like I think I was supposed to have the birthday where you're supposed to go to like the next year, and then I just got in. Like.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I am a solid B+ student. There was no like acceleration.
Yeah. I'm kind of similar. I have an October birthday, but kind of. So I end up, starting college at like 17 for a couple months.
Yeah.
But yes, I also waited until like 28 before I, went back to grad school. Even graduating grad school at 30, there was a bit of that, but there were some like 24-year-olds with us where I was like, I'm glad I'm not 24. I have at least some more life experience. But it seemed like the folks that were like, I would say mid 30s to mid 40s seemed like just such a sweet spot of like some solid life experience, but also, plenty of like decades ahead of them to like really have their career.
You're listening to the Thank You Life podcast because you're interested in hearing inspiring stories about people's personal growth, transformation, and healing with psychedelics. And that's awesome because those stories are really powerful and they deserve to be heard. But if you are anything like me, you are also interested in what's happening out in the world to make these substances, these medicines, more accessible and available to everyone. So my name is Henry Winslow, and I created a free email newsletter called Tricycle Day that helps you do just that. Every week, I send 2 issues that take about 5 minutes to read, so not a huge time commitment at all, but they'll get you caught up on what's happening in psychedelic research, policy reform, and this emerging industry that's unfolding in real time. So if that sounds like something you would like to check out, just go to tricycleday.com, and there you can enter your email and you'll be good to go. So with that said, I'm super happy to be supporting Thank You Life, and let's get back to the podcast.
This episode of the Thank You Life podcast is proudly supported by Dr. Bronner's, a brand that believes in more than just making great soap. As a dedicated corporate sponsor of Thank You Life, Dr. Bronner's is helping us break down barriers to mental health care, advancing our mission to providing life-changing access to psychedelic therapy for those in need. Together, we're making healing possible for underserved communities across the country. So next time you see that iconic bottle on the shelf, know that Dr. Bronner's isn't just providing that refreshing shower. They're also invested in improving access to mental health care for everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bronner's, for being a true partner in healing. Visit drbronner's.com to learn more. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and there's, it's interesting. I haven't even talked about this like really publicly, but there's, in a lot of my upbringing, where I was born into a family that had a really significant spiritual practice. And what brought my parents over from the Philippines was not just like, I think, political, like warfare and martial law at that time, but it was actually a calling into deep spiritual work that my parents followed here. And
what kind of orientation? Like Christian? Or?
I think it maybe had like some Christian Catholic tones to it because culturally the Philippines, that's an entry point. But it really had much more of a mystical and an embodiment of like spirit and messaging and really like spiritual like mediumship too.
Wow, cool.
So like just recently I was having this conversation with my parents of like, I didn't know that was not normal until until like late elementary school into junior high, and I'm like, you guys aren't having like ceremony this weekend, or like you're not like speaking to spirit or doing it, you know, like then you realize socially, like, okay, there's things that are meant to be like sacredly kept in, because there's not an audience that can hold that properly, or
Yeah, don't cast your pearls before swine.
Yeah. It was, and then I was like, oh, okay. So I learned then, but like, the more I've gone into like psychedelic work, that like, and like I kind of wrapped that part of me up a little bit, because I was like, that's just part of like my cultural upbringing, the lineage of like what my parents had, you know, have been practicing. But then when I started to experience different molecules, right, where you experience deep, immersed, embodied love and unconditional love, and like there are tinges of that in with different medicines that I felt I experienced as a child, right?
Fascinating.
Like experiencing these like ineffable states, these like, and in the presence of like community and in ceremony. And
Wow.
I'm kind of like at this like inflection point too of, is this the entry point of how this is like wanting to show up again in my life, the connection to the sacred, the connection to the spiritual.
So is your work with psychedelics, and I was kind of thinking that as you were talking, I was like, oh, I wonder if, you know, social work into psychedelic therapy is like kind of being a full circle piece for you back to this early spiritual stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of, and I don't necessarily think I like mapped that out, right? Because who maps anything out? Like, like you think you map shit out, and then like, but when you're open to listening around what calls you, right? Like, I mean, coming from a Filipino family in which education was like pretty big, is paramount, you know, like my roadmap was get a bunch of education, and then people can't question what you say because you've done the thing, right?
Yeah. Got the credentials.
You got the credentials, but now it is like all of that was necessary to be able to satisfy a certain part of my ego and who I am, right? Like, but now that I've been working with medicine more, the lineage of like carrying truth and having people feel truth and power in their being, you know, and how do we steward that forward? And it could be through therapy, it could be the ways that we learned at school, or it could be in just the presence that we hold and the field that we hold with one another in community and in the collective too. And so when I start to feel that, all of those learnings started very, very, very young.
Wow.
That wasn't something that I learned necessarily in school. That was something that I learned being raised in, you know? So that's kind of like this interesting like place I'm in right now of how this is all coming together, and what's the tapestry going to be right now? I don't know. Open to it.
Thanks for sharing all of that. So you're like 23, 24, fresh out of school. And then, yeah, what was your trajectory between that and getting into psychedelics?
You know, I've always been service oriented. That was like pretty ingrained in us, of a core tenet as a family, as part of our culture. And so I knew I always wanted to be in the helping profession, and social work was the closest thing that resonated. And I went into like community social work. I worked, taught at the university in social work, and then there was always this kind of like thing that would happen during group supervision, which was like, okay, yes, we have to talk about cases, but how's everyone else's like experience and their like being and their body? That was the way I would run group supervision. And whenever group supervision, like, as like it in community social work is a lot of like working with burnout, a lot of working with dead ends or like just systemic challenges. And there was always a part of me as a clinical supervisor that wanted to invite all my supervisees to understand that there is more. There is more to this. So don't get lost in the sauce of the system. It's important that we know what we're doing and that we're skilled, but your entire being is more than what you're doing at this job. And so
where did like that stuff and like, what you just described doing in the group supervision, where did all that even come from? This early spiritual stuff, or?
Good question. I think it came out of a narrative to try to survive social work too. It came out of like, I was so committed to the work that I became the work, and that didn't feel good, right? Like,
so your own process over-identifying with
over-identifying and
with your work
and working through the challenge of like, if I'm not in it like this, if I'm not like on the line working and doing home visits, am I selling out from service work if I'm not getting real gritty with it, And so like the work around that, and a dear friend just kind of shared this with me last week. We were talking about our own sustainability in this work and realizing that what she said is that people will always need refuge. And so maybe you're not on the line doing these like interventions in community, but practitioners and others will always need a place to rest, will always need a place to be seen and heard. And so hearing that really resonated, because that's a lot of what like individual and group supervision was, of like, I see you not as just a social worker, I see you as a human, I see you in all your other gifts. So can we use those other parts of you to resource you to do this job? Yeah.
Right.
But I see and really care about all of these other parts of you too. Yeah. So I think that's where the desire to invite in people's entirety came through, as like, and teaching that. And then getting introduced to psychedelics, like even my own experiences, like I would say that all that stuff in group supervision, but like I'm over here like being all like chaotic with myself, like and judging myself and all of that stuff too, right? Because it's like easier to work with other people around that.
Totally.
But
it was like having burnout yourself.
Yeah.
Having perhaps more maladaptive self-care routines. All sorts of things to get into.
And rationalizing it, because I was like, because I'm doing good work, like, but at least I'm helping people while I'm being self-destructive.
Totally.
Like, cool, real healthy. So,
Totally.
So, there's a fracture there, there's a fracture between like the incongruency between like what I know to be true and what I'm actually feeling in integrity with my body and my being.
Back to that idea of like walking the walk.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways I would say like a lot of these systems are just, because of the burnout, because of the underpaying, it's not super set up. It's not, I mean, certainly not making it easy for us to walk the walk.
Not at all. And I think that's where you have like, really progressive and practices that are based in like true liberation. Rest is paramount. Rest is a pillar in the work, versus praising the overworking, praising the like build hours that are like, and so this is why it's really important that when we're understanding like psychedelics for true liberation, we have to understand the systems that they live in, because they could perpetuate narratives that perpetuate oppression, and so like when I started to realize like the way I was supervising and the invitations I was creating were really important, because it was, especially for young clinicians, it was starting to set up a narrative for them that they would either lead to their freedom and their liberation, or it would perpetuate their oppression and perpetuate negative, like burnout talk and overworking. Right?
Trapped in the system in some sort of way.
Trapped in the system, yeah. And so like when different medicines and molecules and entheogens came into play in my life, there was a light shown around how honest was I being with myself if I turned that narrative my way. Am I doing my homework? And, I went from a B+ student to like a D student for a while. I was like, all right, cool.
You're teaching the class but kind of failing the class.
Yeah, like don't give me the test. But I'll tell you the
I'll
material.
grade your test and tell you what to study. Yeah.
But don't ask me to do that, But and so that's a big pause moment of that's actually been a lot of my like life's work for the last like 15 years of like, are you doing what you are teaching? Are you living what you are inviting people to live? And it's really hard, because we have these great teachers and these books and like we get it here, but like, do we ever cross over to embody it and make the changes in our life to live it daily or to be in true practice of it? And I've met like facilitators and teachers where you can feel that they have, right? You can feel in the way they walk, the way they hold space, that like they are truly working in a practice of it. And then there's other people that say it, and just in their presence you can feel that it's not there. So like when I started working with medicine personally for myself, that was a big teacher. That was the beginning of a lot of teachings around integrity and congruency. And
Are you open to sharing anything about those experiences, about how the medicine shined a light on that for you?
Yeah, I think like I would say like one of my first like pivotal experiences was I worked with a lot of youth around like what is it called? A transitional housing like in South
Sure.
LA. And so there's like 18 to 21. They were just coming out of like probation or aged out of foster care.
Right.
And so that's like a lot of the work I was doing for a while. And there's a lot of youth that were coming out of like into their sexuality, into their sexual orientation, or their gender expansiveness, which was like it's such an honor to hold that space for whatever they were working with. And at that time, I was still like, am I coming out? You know, am I?
So you were going through
I was going
your
through,
journey.
yeah, I was going through it in a deeper way of like, who am I truly relating as with myself? Like, am I beyond this binary? You know, I'm like going through all of these existential questions around who I am, and then trying to do this work with people. And I found that like the moments that they would want to hide behind things, you know, and not come into themselves, that maybe sometimes I was encouraging that more because I was having a parallel process. Like, I get it. It's scary to come out like that. That's why I don't come out. Like, that was like my internal like thing. But, you know, the more I started to work, even like exploring and experimenting, like things like MDMA, there was this like ecstatic and blissful love that showed up for me, and that I was able to like mirror and show to myself. And then doing it in community was like, I saw that in others, they saw it in me. And that started to build a new like schema, or like this whole like another system inside of me of being witnessed and seen. And then the medicine would fade, and then I would come back to like my present state and be like, that was really beautiful, but that wasn't real. You're just high. You know, like that love wasn't real. But the more I moved into like being in those spaces without medicine, you know, or being in those spaces with medicine, the gap between what was a psychedelic trip and what is my reality started to close, you know.
Sure.
And it started to be, I started to believe that I can truly access this in my ordinary state of consciousness.
Talk about integration.
Yeah,
You were
exactly.
you were really starting to integrate the love that you were touching. Totally.
And so there was like, that took some time, and it took community, right? To like give me those reflections, because my own internal narrative was so fucking shameful. And so like for people to, and it took healthy relationships, and it took a lot of being in healthy places of work, right? So you start to shift your life to then align to hold the medicine of the integration. You know, you start to make choices that would be like, no, this is repeating an old narrative of how I'm not good enough, how I'm the black sheep, you know?
So yeah, like making choices so that the external is supporting the new framework of your self-identity, rather than making choices to put yourself in situations that is just going to reaffirm that you should be ashamed of yourself or whatever it might be. Totally.
Yeah,
Which I imagine, especially for the queer community, just speaks about the importance of community.
Oh yeah.
You know, finding community, spaces where you can fully be yourself and talk about things, talk about your process.
Yeah, and I think like at that time, having a majority of my friends being like cis, hetero, you know, folks, like who are very loving, but knowing I needed to witness and be witnessed by other people who had a shared life experience.
100%.
And like the more that happened, like, and this is what I love about work with psychedelic medicines, is that it begins to like cultivate an imagination of a world that you thought you could never have. And so the expansion of that, of like, we cannot work into cultivating a life that we want if we can't imagine it.
Fair enough.
So like what I used to shame as like a fantasy of what I want my life to be, And I'm like, no, this is a blueprint now.
Wow, yeah, what a shift. Like through the lens of shame, this is just a fantasy. But my only option is to really stay in like the real world of like that versus, oh, this is a vision. I'm gonna make myself a vision board and like let myself take steps toward this.
Yeah. When I began to see them as like possibilities that can turn to realities versus dissociative states that I'm fantasizing about, like that became tangible.
Yeah, what a fucking shift that is right there. Damn.
Yeah. Thankful, because living in a fragmented place of like you're only can like escape to this one fantasy and then you have to live in a reality, it was all the seeds for like my depression and my anxiety of living in an incongruency, you know, and never having the world's touch.
I love that because, you know, I think I like to talk, and I think it's very useful to talk often about depression and anxiety from, you know, like the lens of the nervous system. I think all that's super useful, but this deep psychological stuff of like what our reality is, who we are, what our identity is, and what is like our power in all of that is also super crucial. So yeah, I guess will you just say that piece again?
Yeah, you know, what's coming up for me is I was at a conference and someone framed depression as, you know, being fragmented or removed from the wholeness of yourself. And when we do this work, we are weaving ourselves back together in a new way. And I think in my experience, like there was the part of me that wanted to please my family, wanted to please my ego, wanted to be the perfect youngest child, right? And now it's like coming together of like, you are very unique as you are, you know? I was having this conversation with like my parents the other day, like, you know, I've had like some challenging experiences of like being queer, being, you know, being in a throuple in a ethically non-monogamous relationship, and like how many times do I freaking have to come out to my family, right? There's like I'm like, you know, this is too much. And that like fucked with my nervous system a lot, you know, like
For sure.
I'm just like, how many times do I have to announce my truths? And
Because it's so separate from like whatever gets to fit in the box of their reality.
yeah. And so like when we talk about like leveraging like medicines like for queer folks like me, there was I guess, and it's not for everyone, but in my experience, the narrative I had was the coming out narrative, right? Like because I have an orientation of my sexuality and my relational orientation that feels true to me, I now have a responsibility to tell everybody about it, right? That's like the coming out like narrative where where I really do think like the brain plasticity and the compassion and the other things that move around in medicine work is like, no, that is actually your like superpower. That is your gift to be able to love beyond these structures that you have been taught, and you inherently do it, right? And so this like reframe around why I think queer people are magic is because they are born into a place where they see beyond what is told to them.
Just that little box.
Yeah. And so then seeing that, you know, and being with that differently then I felt empowered to do an invitation in versus a coming out.
Ooh, so for you, inviting your family into your reality in some kind of way?
And I said, this is sacred. The magic that I am experiencing in like this expansive and blissful love, the magic I'm experiencing in playing in the divine, like feminine, masculine, and beyond the binary, right? That is not anything I need to apologize or come out around, right? That is actually, how do I harness this magic in a way that I can invite people in to experience pieces of it?
Totally.
And that took a really long time because I was like, oh my God, how am I going to tell my family? My like siblings were so loving and supportive, but it was, it took so long to do it because it was still felt shameful. And like, that's not the way I wanted to have the conversation. I wanted it to be a way to be magical. I wanted it to be a way to be celebrated. And I needed to believe that fully before I had the conversation. So, and you experience magic, you experience bliss and as yours with medicine, you know? So those are like the ways where, did I know that the time I was like dancing around on some MDMA? No. Like, but do I know that that led to creating new information inside of me that helped to this process? Absolutely.
I love that. And what I love about that is, I think even in just the, upwards of 20 episodes that we've done with this, and people share their psychedelic experiences, and it can just look so different. And yeah, for some people, it is an insight on medicine, and then they go integrate that. And what I love about this is, in some ways, I feel like I'm just getting to like map out all the different ways that psychedelics can heal. And this one seems like, yeah, I had a psychedelic experience. It sounded pretty powerful in a number of ways, like really feeling that in the love that you were talking about, and that the experience initiated a process that led to the untangling of your shame, the reframing of the coming out versus inviting in, and a lot of these pieces.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I love that concept of like something happened, and I can't even necessarily tell you what, but it initiated a process of change for me.
Yeah, it did. And you know what it like, now that I'm kind of like sitting with and talking with you about it, it's it was a, I had been talking about this like essence of being a seeker, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think some of my personal medicine experiences had given me permission to continue to be curious. And especially like, sometimes we see the work as like, you really need to get in there and do the work, which is true. Because I've had those experiences, especially as of recently, where you do have to work into like the shadowy underworld to like see some things.
Yeah.
But in my early experiences with psychedelics, a lot of it was joy, and in the narrative of like that I've created for myself, or in my upbringing, of like joy is a reward versus joy is essential, right? And so when I started like really feeling bliss and joy, like there's moments of like wanting more and more of that, and that's also scary, being a young like psychedelic journeyer, because then you start like just chasing the medicine.
Sure.
But knowing, and then that's when having good elders, having good teachers and mentors to understand like joy is an essential component to resource you, because the world's going to be really hard for someone like me, really hard for a lot of people. That's not going to go away. So if you can continue to practice joy as part of your resistance, and not shame yourself for having fun, not shame yourself for like experiencing bliss, but know that it will be part of your reserve, because shit's going to get hard, and shit will always be hard. So it helped me to seek those out in a way that I knew were going to eventually be important for me. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing about all that. I want to go back a little bit to our partnership, because there's a couple other really interesting pieces to talk about, and then just see where that takes us.
Okay.
So, we were talking about these 3 queer facilitator groups that you did last year, but actually before that, back in 2023, you facilitated what was our first group cohort. So yeah, I'd love to just talk about that a little bit. And, I think that originally came up, I'm not sure if that was your idea. I know you and Meredith had talked, and then basically she came to me and was like, hey, I think we can do this thing. On our end, we had been talking about the possibility of group really offering a few different things. One of them being that it could be more cost effective all around. So the money that we raise can go further. The money that the participants put in can be less, and it can be a great way to bring folks into psychedelics. And another really crucial piece, especially for some particular populations that we're looking to serve, including the queer community, the BIPOC community, also veterans. I think all 3 of those communities, there's great examples of like where it can be really powerful for those folks to be in community, heal in community, talk about their lived experience together in community. So yeah, we with all of that, group just seemed like such a great thing for us to work into. Thank You Life, and yeah, the first one we got to be with you, and not only did that happen, we also were able to film some of it, and we actually have an episode that isn't available yet, but is like 25 minutes long, following one of those people around, and interviews before and after the ketamine sessions, and really seeing her journey of healing, which is so beautiful.
Yeah. Prior to working with Thank You Life, there was, in our practice, there was like a pretty strong calling to do group work for a multitude of reasons, for like the price accessibility point, for understanding at a really deep level that for millennia, groups, villages, communities have been healing collectively, right? And
for the most part, was how psychedelics were done.
Yeah, and so there's like, it was always kind of like foreign to me when we were like do like one-on-one, like, and I understand the value of all the different formats.
Same.
And like in my own process of like collective work, how could we do collective healing work? Because the profound nature of being witness and bearing witness in a group space is like, and the nonverbal nature even of some of that too, like, is it begins to like shift and change people in different ways, especially if they are in this like loop of self-defeat, or like can't get out of their own way. The perspective that gets offered in group, because there's this inherent process of extending empathy and compassion when you are hearing somebody else's story too. And the way that that activates when someone is more compassionate or empathic towards someone else, how that starts to stir something within them too. And I think that's really what we saw and the 3 sessions that we did all together, and like, it's really beautiful as a facilitator when the group just does their own work, right? It's just like, and it's so beautiful to watch and to like experience. But the way everyone was like encouraging, the way that everyone was like quietly holding space and understanding, and like kind of sometimes even like reparenting one another in that, like, it was, I don't think we could have predicted the level of impact that that had too.
I love that.
And, you know, we are in a space where we are like scientifically and data driven, where although we know anecdotally this has worked for millennia in communities, like, it is important for us to understand, like, how does this work now? How does this work now in this particular matrix of place and time where we are at in this like psychedelic resurgence, you know?
Totally.
And how would this ancient wisdom of group dynamics like to join or not join with this modern container, you know?
Totally.
I always think that's like a really fascinating question. But so far what we have seen is that it can be really powerful and have all of these like additional benefits to them, in addition to like the work that the medicine is doing. It is also the medicine. The group work is also the medicine.
Yeah. I agree. And I think there is a lot of evidence that it can definitely be useful. We're seeing it be very useful. And I love that as like a continued open question of, how does group, how does community play a role here?
Yeah. It was a really amazing process, where actually the ketamine wasn't centered. It was the group that was centered. You know, ketamine was an ally and was a friend to help catalyze and steward a process. But it was all of the work that happened in between and even during and beyond the group that I think is the real medicine.
I really love that in the sense of, seems a bit less external if we center the humans. I think there's other spaces where we don't want to center the humans, but if we're talking about our connection and healing, let's center the humans, not like the external thing that we're using to facilitate an altered state. I mean, it makes me think of anything from ayahuasca to alcohol to coffee. Like, how much in an alcohol space the alcohol is centered more than like the humans, and it's like, oh, this is here with us, but just to facilitate.
I mean, it's funny, humans love to like avoid being with themselves, or like to put like stuff on a pedestal and then want a focal point, right? But this is a conversation I was having with a few of my friends this past weekend was, it is about the medicine, but it's not. It's about the work that we are doing in these circles together, and whether this medicine can help uplift and give us clarity and connection around whatever work we are doing collectively as a community. I think that's one way to look at it. You know, and then like, this doesn't negate like there are real clinical indications that we use medicine for, right? And there's that. But when we're talking about collective group work, I've kind of like deepened or shifted my paradigm around what is actually the collective organism desiring and wanting and moving towards.
Again, just such a great question.
And what is the right medicine that will help either accelerate that, move it, hold it, you know, like that feels like a different type of relationship than I think maybe a lot of our Western paradigm has.
Sure. Yeah, the Western paradigm Is it more like, I don't know, like what can we push through?
Or like what symptom can we reduce? One thing can we heal? And I think that's the challenge, like, because we like to scale, right? And we like to replicate and repeat. Like, we tend to codify medicines that are not meant to be codified. You know, we tend to codify an experience that is meant to maintain in the mystical. And I think that's where we get ourselves into trouble sometimes.
I agree. And I really love codifying it in some degree. It feels like my science, where, you know, physicists go try to unveil the mystery on a certain level. I really love doing that in the psychedelic space and in the spiritual space. And I also don't want to do that like through a medical model per se. Like, just me as like what I feel really drawn to. I don't think we need to codify it through like a medical system or this, that, and the other thing. But it can be fun to make more sense of it. But yeah.
Yeah, we all need, I think, different archetypes to relate to, right? Like, but how do we hold those as like doctrine or guides, you know?
Yeah. Dogma.
You know, people love to believe real hard in one thing.
Yeah.
Stability, consistency helps kind of calm our nervous system, right? It's harder. It is harder to stay in the curiosity and the mystical and the unknowing, because there's no endpoint to that, you know?
Or like concrete answers necessarily.
No
yeah.
concrete answers.
It's harder to live in the gray.
Yeah, someone in this last retreat that we did, had a colleague that say like, object constancies are life's work, of like the true belief of the love and like spirit that is all still there despite us not seeing it, you know, that the love of parent, universe, whoever, like greater being is ever presently existing despite it not being right in our face telling us it's there.
Object constants. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting one. But like, yeah. But an object that you can't necessarily touch or feel or see.
Yeah, but you have firm belief that it exists.
Or I would say you can touch and feel and see it, but not in the same way that you can like your fellow human being or a chair that's
Yeah. I mean, I think like, I always think it's interesting to explore like when people dive deeper into psychedelic work, what their relationship to not just belief in something, but their relationship in like faith, right? Of like a greater like knowing and not being attached to what that means in this human realm. Like, those intersections are fun to explore too.
I love you saying that, and unsurprisingly, especially because of my own more like spiritual bent, a lot of these conversations often go into very spiritual places. The idea of, that, you know, faith without evidence certainly being in that bucket.
Materialists would kill us.
I know. And they're the ones running science at the
I
moment.
know. Don't listen. Just kidding.
One last thing I would love to touch on is what's happening this year with Thank You Life, Integrate, and another one of our community partners, New Earth. So would you share about New Earth and what y'all are doing there?
Yeah, I'm just really, really excited about this partnership. So Integrate as an organization who provides like ketamine-assisted therapy and other services, they're there was this imagining between New Earth, Thank You Life, and Integrate of how do we bring psychedelic assisted work into community health. And New Earth being a long existing organization that have served a lot of youth and young adults who have had their own journey, like in exploring ketamine, to help not only their clients but also their staff. And so New Earth has this like profound wisdom of knowing that like we are an integrated system. Our staff have to be well in order to be resourced to work with our clients. And that's what really drew me to New Earth too, is that they were really principled in knowing that the whole system needs care and support.
As an interesting point, now that I have a bit more insight into your early work with social work that you were talking about. So, I mean, I imagine you look at New Earth and it's like, oh yeah, this is what I wish all the systems that I was working in had some sense of. And yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and I think even thinking about that of like social workers, case managers, they have such an essential and important job. And we don't do enough as a society to care for them and to resource them because they are doing really, really hard work. And the assumed trajectory is like, do hard work, even abandon yourself, abandon your health, and get burned out. And then don't worry, we'll have a new wave that comes in, right? Of like people that graduate grad school and then you do the whole internship model.
Right.
But I think it's time to really shake up that paradigm, right? Of can we resource, can we care for our social workers? And maybe it's with medicine to be in a way where they can move out of their default mode, right? Of being burnt out, of being tired, and they can pivot and reorient themselves and refresh their service, right? Because that shows up. Your clients know when you're burnt out, you know? So New Earth has that frame. And so with my background as social work and just like the ethics and the principles we hold at Integrate, like, and also in the social work paradigm of like person and environment, you know, and knowing that like people that move through New Earth have been have been enrolled with New Earth. They worked with them for a long time. And so it was important for us to see, can we do this ketamine-assisted therapy in their setting and with all of their community wrapped around them too. And so this is a pilot that we're wanting to experiment of like, if we can make the effort to be integrated into an organization and a community like New Earth, then can we galvanize all of this energy and resource and care all around them to help with the integration process, to help with the prep, so that it's not like they're just jumping into psychedelic work and then jumping back into a certain life.
They have their New Earth community here, but then they go do ketamine and then come back. It's that they do ketamine here, and like you said, the prep and integration get to be supported by the community that they're continuing to be in.
Absolutely, and I think that's like where Betty Eisner calls it set, setting, and matrix, where you have your set setting, but you actually have the matrix of the social political context that you live in before, during, and after your psychedelic journey.
Yeah, fascinating.
And we have to consider that, because if we don't consider that, then we fall into this like psychedelic spiritual bypassing where you have like a moment of like perhaps clarity, but we don't take into consideration your real lived experience that you're returning to, like, and we don't work your treatment around the reality of your life. So that is what we are intending and what we're hoping to do in partnering and perhaps exploring effective, feasible, and durable models for psychedelics and community mental health.
Yeah, and our sense is that this is really the first of its kind, which I know all three of our organizations are super excited about. And yeah, I know that you would love to see this model obviously have success in this pilot that we're doing at the moment. And yeah, for us to be able to find other community organizations that are interested and willing to do something like this.
Yeah. Yeah, that is like, that is the hope, you know, being a community social worker and wishing I had this level of resourcing and that my clients had this as an option too. Like that we would move away from like long-term community health where people are surviving to where they actually do get to live and thrive in their life, right? I'm not saying that doesn't happen in community mental health, but we have these tools that are not being used and they could be used. So
yeah, that could help increase the percent of time that gets to happen, that people get to thriving. Totally.
Yeah, we just had a few people just complete their treatment, and some of the feedback that they had, and we're working with like relatively low dose, you know, ketamine right now, and the things that they are accessing of like, there's more to life. There's more to life than like just this struggle. Like to begin to have that insight that you are not just your struggle, or we had a young man like who's caretaking for his younger brothers and is really burnt out and frustrated, but he was able to access compassion and say like, I know they're hard, but they're just kids, right? So those key moments that begin to change intergenerational patterns by extending compassion, by creating a wider landscape of perspective around struggle, you know, those are important narratives that can lead to a lot of liberation and disruption of intergenerational and systemic traumas. And this is when we talk about like inviting a place of imagining a different reality while still knowing this is the matrix of reality we live in. So it's slow, but it's beautiful and powerful.
I thought I had about when you were talking about the social workers and getting them this kind of support is, you know, to link that with your idea of being able to like see a vision of possibility for your life through psychedelics, and then getting to recognize, oh, it's not just a fantasy. I might be able to actually move toward that. The question in my mind is like, what is the impact of if we can support in a large way social workers getting to do a bit of their own work with psychedelics and really focusing on like the creativity part of psychedelics, like what visions will they have for themselves in their field that could, you know, galvanize them to build new systems and structures that could be more like New Earth, and where it's a structure that takes care of the social workers, understands the intensity of burnout, those different kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think, you know, some of our ancestors in the civil rights movements and activists, like the version of this that Audre Lorde says is like, we can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And so we need to be creative. It is essential to our liberation to be creative, because we are constantly fed what we're supposed to do, but essentially sometimes those things are maintaining a status quo and maintaining structures of power, right? So it is essential that we support social workers and service providers in imagining and dreaming up and being inspired, because we need to come up with new ways to move through these real world problems.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think of psychedelics similarly, where with what you just said, I'm like, yeah, there's definitely a degree where we're trying to kind of fit psychedelics into the old world structures, the medical system, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, there's also this idea that I heard once that I actually used a bit in my kind of capstone at Naropa about game A and game B systems. The idea is that a game A system is like the current market. So if we talk about universities, Harvard, I went to Georgia Tech, whatever these universities, you get a degree, all that would be game A. Game B would be a system that is different than that does something completely different. But the whole idea was that to actually help society transfer to something in game B, that new game B system needs to compete on game A's terms. So it needs to, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do things, but it's just an example, I guess. So it's like, okay, game B offers something new, but it's also offering those same kind of metrics that game A likes and looks for, and has to do better than the game A systems at game A's game, so to speak. And so I think of Naropa as an example of that. Like, Naropa gave me a degree that I could get licensed as a therapist, but they also had like meditation classes, and it was all very experientially based and doing their thing. In some ways, I think we're kind of in that with psychedelics, where we're like, okay, psychedelics is this game B thing that is offering so much more, yet, okay, we'll show you how like PTSD goes into remission from MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, and depression scores decrease, etc. Saying all of that, I feel like we could get better at articulating this other piece that psychedelics offers, whether it's like the spiritual piece or just, I know we've had conversations about capturing more than just symptom decrease. What's like the well-being increase that can happen, and how do we capture those things? On one hand, these tools are just different. Like, we don't necessarily have the tools to capture these things, but anyway, bit of a rant, but
I kind of think like if we can set up a norm or a subculture that is willing to always interrogate game A, and that's part of the work, and is like when we think about the pacing of change and transformation, there's a deep intelligence in game B of knowing that it has to be slow. There has to be buy-in, there has to be safety in one's being for them to drop into a full belief. And sometimes that's through an educational structure. Sometimes that is through a medicalization, right?
Totally.
But like, let's not get lost in the sauce around what we're getting to.
Totally. It's such like a Trojan horse kind of thing. It's like, okay, great, ketamine in the medical model.
Sure.
But then, that's just like the seed that flowers into like a whole other thing. Yeah,
and it's the game A's. It's important,
Totally.
And there's, like our conversation today, there's always more.
I think that's a great place to pause.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wilhelmina. This was super fun.
Fun. To be continued.
Yes. Until next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Thank You Life podcast. If you would like to get involved with our mission and help more people in need access ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. Donations are the sole means through which we provide financial assistance to our beneficiaries, and we currently have close to 1,000 people in need on our waitlist. This work could not happen without our generous supporters, so if you've been touched by hearing these stories of healing and want to make an impact, please consider visiting our website, thankyoulife.org, and becoming a monthly supporter.